Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest. And his name is Sven Hughes. And this is unusual, this podcast, because normally I pick people rather desperately and I'm looking around for new guests and I think, oh my God, it's my podcast to come this week. Who am I going to do? Sven was offered me on a plate, and I've been told that Sven is going to be, this is an awful thing to say before a podcast, I've been told he's going to be really, really interesting and he's got so much to say. And actually, I have been reading about some of the stuff he's done, and actually I think he is going to be pretty cool. And I like him already. He's got a beard and glasses, and he's smoking a vape, which is a good thing. So Sven, welcome
to the
podcast. Sven, we've got to go straight into Afghanistan, because that's where you cut your teeth. You've actually seen, have you seen the elephant? Have you actually been shot at and stuff?
Yes, I have been shot at, yes.
And is it as Winston Churchill said, very exciting being shot at without result?
It focuses the mind, definitely. I was very glad to be surrounded by some very competent soldiers when I was shot at. It was part of a sort of journey I was on, really, when I was serving out in Afghanistan. I served, first of all, as a reservist out in Afghanistan, and then also went back as a sort of civilian consultant to work with a psychological operations team over there as well. So it was part of the process, being shot at, of learning that we had to find a better way to resolve the situation. And so being shot at was sort of indicative of the problem, which is we could solve this by talking to people, and instead we were all shooting at each other. You know, there was a much better way of solving the problem, let's put it that way.
I think I'm with you. A few years ago, I went to address the regimental dinner of the Light Dragoons, and fantastic bunch of chaps, and they were one of the first units to go out to Afghanistan on that first run. And they had some fantastic boys' own adventures there, as you can imagine. But my views on Afghanistan have changed quite drastically since then. I remember at the time I was quite gung-ho, and I was quite excited that our boys were going to get some combat experience. I mean, you remember there was that long period where, apart from the Falklands, our army was pretty much unused.
Yes.
And then suddenly you've got intense combat in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. So I was all gung-ho. Now, I look at Afghanistan, I think, what a complete waste of time. We've achieved nothing, have we, really?
Okay, there's two sides to that. If you're out there on the ground at a local level, where the Taliban have been in a village, or if they're skinning people and throwing them down the well to poison the water.
Is that what they do?
They absolutely, you know, or they're cutting out people's tongues because they've been talking to Westerners. You know, you look at the need for protection at a local level of civilians who are engaged in a conflict they don't want to be part of. You know, definitely there is a need, was a need, at least in the short term, to step in and to provide some support for people who are caught up in conflict unnecessarily. The strategic objectives, I think there's it's a fairly well-trodden path to say, have the strategic objectives been met? That's very questionable, I'd say. You know, and is the Taliban now on the ascendancy again? Quite possibly. Is that sort of defeating the whole purpose of why we went in the first place? Quite possibly. But definitely on a human level, when I was there, certainly on a human level, am I glad I went? Am I proud to have taken part in operations and support efforts and influence operations that made a constructive difference on the ground? Yes, I definitely am.
Yeah, I have maximum respect for all the people who served out there. I'm not dissing what they did, and I just think as a father of sons, I wouldn't like the idea that my boys were sent out to essentially mow the lawn, go on these pointless bloody suicide patrols, basically, like the one that I think the Welsh Guards got taken out very heavily on. Was it Rupert Thornlow? I think that was this was wrong. You cannot get people to join your armed forces and then let them down in that way.
Certainly, I think there was a certain feeling out there that, and maybe it's still the case now, that the armed services weren't getting the support that they needed, either in public opinion or actually in financial and necessary equipment support. I don't think there's any contention in saying that.
They had shit equipment, didn't they? Those vehicles that didn't protect them at all.
Yeah, at the start, certainly, yeah. And this is a live issue now. I mean, you're seeing it with the current Defence Secretary at the moment, turning around saying he wants $2 billion more, and an awful lot of people saying, yes, the armed forces need more money. You know, they need more support if they're going to be sent off to war. Now, the problem you've then got is the exchequer and the fact of, do you give it to the NHS, do you give it to the military, what kind of wars are we fighting?
It's a no-brainer for me, Sven.
Yeah, but there's different ways of doing it. I mean, this is all predicated on the idea that you need to take kinetic action, physical interventions to affect peace. What I come from a slightly different position, which is, look, if we haven't got the money as a nation to pay our armed services the kind of funds that we may want to, well, then we have to be a bit more savvy, and we have to find different ways to affect our strategic objectives, our tactical objectives as a nation. And that leans you then more towards influence operations. They're more cost effective and arguably more effective. And if you can win the hearts and minds and get people to come on a journey with you towards peace or towards engagement, then you don't have to fight them anyway. So sort of, there is a different way of doing this, and that's more engagement-based, dialogue-based.
And can I say, I admire the way you sort of brought the conversation around there to your pet topic, which I was going to do anyway, actually, to be fair. You were there as a Psy Ops expert, weren't you?
Well, whether or not expert, I was there as a Psy Ops practitioner.
I mean, yes. I just love that word, Psy Ops. Yes. Psychological operations, is that what it means?
Yeah, it doesn't actually exist anymore. I mean, Psy Ops has actually been phased out by the British military. It's now...
What?
No, Psy Ops has been sort of... What I was a part of was something called 15 UK Psy Ops, which was a regiment, a team, a unit, which is now folded into something else called 77 Brigade. So Psy Ops as a word, I don't think actually exists in the British military anymore.
Oh, right.
It's all part of a wider influence operations.
Maybe it sounds too American or something.
I think it just confused people. I think they were calling it Psych Ops. It sounds as though it's implicitly sort of dark arts, where actually it's a bit simpler than that. Psy Ops I don't think is common parlance anymore.
Can you give me some examples of Psy Ops, and I mean the kind of stuff you were doing? I don't want you to give away our secrets, obviously, but I mean there's presumably stuff you can tell me.
Well, I think the intent of Psy Ops, certainly when I was serving, which was to undermine the will of the enemy, or to win over the commitment of the uncommitted, or to strengthen the commitment of the committed. Okay, so if you start there, so if it's tier one Taliban, the people who are really the main people who are causing the aggression, that are subjugating the people and also fighting to ISAF, to undermine their will to fight. Okay, well that might be by directly messaging them with leaflets or radio or whatever it may be, to question the motivations of why they're actually doing what they're doing, and if they really are acting in the best interests of either their religion or their sociological factors that they're saying. Winning over the commitment of the uncommitted might be tier two. So these are people who aren't necessarily wanting to follow the Taliban, but haven't really got much of a choice. They maybe are growing crops and are forced to grow opium, or they are their child is taken into prostitution to pay debts, and the only way of getting their child back from the Taliban, who's essentially selling their child for prostitution, is to then grow opium for them and then pay back the debt. These are very complicated things that needed to be messaged against. Now, that's not something that a bullet is going to solve. That's about key leader engagement, engaging with tribal elders in the shuras, about putting messaging out there to give alternatives to getting themselves in that position in the first place. And then supporting the committed, the people who are actually realising that ISAF in that case are actually trying to do some good, and who they are, what's their mandate, why are they there, and how to stay out of the trouble areas, so as not to get sucked into the conflict.
Presumably the tier two people, the best line of argument is, if you stick with us, we're not going to let you get got by the Taliban, and we're not going to let you down. Is that kind of the thing?
And that can be a problem now with some of our actions consequently. Yeah, absolutely. So this is where you must walk the talk. Now there's many instances I know of where that was done by ISAF, which is, if you engage with ISAF, there is sort of betterment, and there is an infrastructure that can be built, and there is schooling, there is education, and so forth. Obviously, in the long term, if we want to keep our credibility in the region, though, that has to be sustained. And if anything we do wrong, we or ISAF do wrong, is exploited as a messaging opportunity by the Taliban. They will be identifying every single opportunity.
Well, ultimately, it's not up to you whether the promises are honoured, is it? You're just a kind of a grunt on the front line doing the Psy Ops thing. Yeah. You must have said stuff that has not been fulfilled, and you must feel a bit shit about. Sorry, I don't want to make you feel guilty, but
we really would try not to, and the advice, and I don't want to overstate my role. I mean, obviously, I had much more senior people out there who were taking these decisions. But one of the principles of Psy Ops in terms of the training is credible, timely, accountable information that's demonstrably then delivered. I mean, part of a good information operations cell, what they're doing to the commander is making sure that they advise the commander that whatever he says or she says can then be fulfilled, and the consequences of not doing that. So certainly at a tactical level, it was rare not to deliver against the claim or the promise. At a more strategic level over a period of time now, that's probably questionable, isn't it? Yeah.
So the tier one, who are in a way the most interesting, because how do you deal with these people? And I read something fascinating, I think from a previous interview you gave, where the thing that the tier one Taliban fear most is not death, but being captured. Is that right?
That was Operation Bazooka. So we were tasked with helping. There was several hundred tier one Taliban who were entrenched in a position in southern Afghanistan and had been surrounded by ISAF. And the inevitable consequence was to get them to put down their weapons was going to involve, a very significant battle of kind of going in. They were entrenched. They had mortar positions. They were wanting a battle, and we were given the opportunity to message them for 24 hours, 48 hours before what was otherwise going to be an
inevitable. It's going to be like Okinawa or something.
Well, it's going to be certainly a serious loss of life on both sides potentially. Yeah. And in fact, what it took to make them put down their weapons was simply what normally happens is you will fly over them with a helicopter and drop leaflets saying, look, tomorrow we're coming to either bomb or attack this area, put down your weapons and walk away.
Yeah.
And quite often, let's say in Iraq, that was a very successful campaign because you have a demotivated group of people who don't want to be there fighting anyway. And if they're given the opportunity to surrender, walk off the battlefield, walk away and live to fight another day, or go.
That's conscripts in a regular army.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Now with the Taliban tier one, that was different. They weren't. You could drop as many leaflets saying we're coming to bomb or to fight tomorrow, and they'd be saying, right, bring it on. Let's have the fight.
Yeah.
Instead, what we did was found out from intelligence they were much more fearful of being taken to Guantanamo. So all it took really was just putting leaflets down onto them, which was, we're not coming to kill you, we're coming to capture you.
And put you in an orange jumpsuit.
Exactly, and put a picture of that on there, and then suddenly they put their weapons down and walked off the battlefield. Now, there's a moral line there in terms of exact representation of the facts and so forth, but what certainly can be assessed based on the available evidence of post the event. We were watching them put down their weapons and walk off the battlefield. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm tapping the table.
Yes, you are. You're tapping the table, despite my Psy Ops attempts to control your mind. Yeah, my clear instruction. What are you doing? You must be tier one. You must be one of the tricky ones. So, what is it did you establish what they most fear about going to Guantanamo?
Yes, there was intelligence that was feeding our decision to go with that campaign. I'm not going to go into the details of it and where that came from, but yes, there was quite clear.
But was it they didn't like the jumpsuits, or they didn't like the being denied martyrdom?
Yes, I think it was a combination of obviously, yes, being denied martyrdom. They were there prepared to die and not wanted to die, but very happy to take as many of us with them as possible.
Yes,
and would have therefore secured their eternity and their families' lifestyle in the present as well, because the family would have been paid money by the Taliban as martyrs dying with honour.
So the same applies as it does with Hamas and an organisation. I mean, and like the Iranians, I think, do the same, don't they? You get rewarded for martyrdom.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're fighting some quite motivated people.
Normally, yes. If they're part of tier one Taliban or part of a terrorist organisation, they're going to be fairly motivated. Yeah.
Okay. So you are out in Afghanistan, or even Iraq, and you've been captured by Jihadi John. Now, I mean, or somebody of that ilk. Okay. Now he's got that cold, completely dead look in his eyes. He's seen so much bad shit. He's killed so many people. How are you going to penetrate that and get through to him in a way that's going to find him persuasive?
Okay, first of all, let's separate it from me being captured and all the rest and just deal with it as a piece of sort of psychology. Anyone that's gone on the path to become radicalized has therefore accepted information that's been delivered by someone in a step-by-step process that's made them more and more radical, and there's been, arguments have been presented to them, and their sense of disaffection has been exploited to the point at which they've reached an endpoint where they feel as though violence is their only option, violence is their only alternative. Okay? By the very fact that they've gone through that step-by-step process, you can then understand the radicalization process, and if you sort of assess it almost as a science, you can work out then where are the points at which you can intervene, what are the conversations you could have with that person to make them step back from the brink, from the precipice. And even the most committed person, it doesn't matter if they're a committed smoker or a committed Christian or it can be anything, a committed person who's fearful of spiders. If your brain is committed towards something irrational, rational arguments can be presented to bring it back from that brink, because you've got an irrational response to a rational stimulus. Yeah? So we demonstrated that with a campaign we did called Not Another Brother, which was a viral campaign we did online for a charity. I think you know Majid Nawaz.
Yes.
You wrote about him recently.
Quilliam.
Yeah, Quilliam, yeah. So Majid approached us and said, look, can we intervene online to stop the radicalization of Muslim youth in this country?
Oh, yeah.
And again, so what we did there was look at the way in which people were being radicalized online, what was the messaging that was being used to take them from people who were not considering this at all to the point at which they were literally at the point of getting kinetic, at getting committed to committing violence, and designed an online intervention campaign called Not Another Brother that was then shared in their networks and would help them step back from the precipice. And that was considered, I think I'm right in saying it's sort of widely considered as the most successful online campaign that's ever been done against radicalization. And that was really going to people who were committed and wanting to go abroad to fight against this country. And, I think it had 500 million media impressions in the first 7 days. It had people writing.
500 million in 7 days?
I think so, yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal. And it also, what was exciting by it is that people were reaching out to charities, though, who we were putting it in networks where people were being radicalized, and instead then of listening to the siren's voice of the people who were radicalizing them, they were in fact going over to the charities that were also in that space saying, I'm fearful I'm being radicalized, help, and I'm making contact with you to get me out of this cycle, So it can be done, and it is possible to do.
So how did you get the video out there into the right circles? Did you put it on Facebook groups of Al-Qaeda and stuff?
Yes, I mean, and assess their what you call node analysis. So you do a sort of a mapping of all the different influence structures online, where these people are being approached and who's approaching them and how they're being approached. Yeah. And then you introduce your material into that network.
But wouldn't they see this stuff and know it's from the other side and go, I'm not watching this. Shaitan, or whatever they call him. Shaitan is putting this stuff out.
Yes, you have to. Well, in this particular case, what we did was actually put it out unbranded for the first few days.
Yeah. Oh, so it looked initially like another recruitment video.
People thought they were watching a recruitment video to start with. Yeah. Now, obviously, it caused an awful lot of controversy within the recruitment networks. An awful lot of people got very hostile towards it. That actually worked in our favour. That made it more attractive for people to watch because they wanted to hear what was being discussed.
Look at this disgusting
exactly. Look at this piece of nonsense and all the rest. And of course, but we created it in such a way as then it was really appealing, though, to really underlying psychological principles to do with risk and reward, which is hopefully through the video questioning what they were being told and being able to see it in a new way, that then it didn't matter what other people then turned around and said, or the recruiters were saying, no, don't listen to this stuff. The more they said that, the more they were falling into the trap of the video.
Right. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and I think we'll agree, really, really interesting special guest, Sven Hughes. More in a moment.
Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with A.W.R. Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or a firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at Breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and I think we can agree, very fascinating ex-army Psy Ops guest, Sven Hughes of Verbalisation, who's pushing to the commercial use, if you like, the skills that he learned while seeing the elephant, fighting the Taliban and outwitting them, which I think is pretty cool. And I like the idea that you're building a career after the army. I like the idea that our boys, having risked, and girls, having risked their lives, can then make some money out of it. I think it's really good.
Well, hopefully not just make some money, but continue to do
And
some
save
good.
and
actually,
save the world as well.
Yeah.
That goes.
I mean, to be very clear, with the Not Another Brother project we're just talking about, we made no money whatsoever. We were helping to finance that, so it's not just about making money. Britain has a really important opportunity at the moment. We're very successful, sort of the Mayfair set in the late 60s, Goldsmith and David Sterling and so forth, selling and exporting arms, kinetic warfare. Okay, morally, just park aside the morals of that for a second, but that really helped build the British economy leading to Thatcherism.
All right.
We have an opportunity now with both our marketing industry, with our influence capabilities, our political campaigning capabilities. We have a vast amount of talent in this country, which if we can package soft power and influence effectively now, prior to Brexit, and really work collectively and make this an industry to be proud of, and morally responsible, ethically, legally doing the right things and so forth, but also commercialising it, yes. We have one of the most extraordinary things to take us through Brexit and post-Brexit to sell to the world. And we should be, and yes, a lot of people in uniform at the moment should be hopefully a part of that.
I'm really glad you're doing this. I'm excited by your project. Later on, we're going to talk about Trump, we're going to talk about Brexit, and we're going to talk about how to deprogram Greens. I think I might try that one on you. But I haven't exhausted this whole Taliban jihadist thing yet. Can you just tell me a bit more about what is it they're after? Presumably one of the things, they want to be the baddest mothers in town, don't they? I mean, that's the thing about gang warfare generally. You want to be in the gang that goes harder than everyone else. And there's no question that ISIS, part of their appeal, is that they do shit that everyone else is appalled by. Is that your sense, that people want to be part of that?
That's a fairly simplistic way of looking at it. I mean, with some of the work we've done for particular clients, we've specified at least 6 main motivators that can help. If you talk to people on those subjects who are currently radicalized, you can help walk them back from the precipice. Now, one of those groups are certainly the absolute ultra-violent, so committed, it's almost, sociopathic degree of violence. That's the hardest group to hit, But around them, actually, an awful lot of other motivations. Now, it may be alienation, a sense of disaffection. It may be a sense of misrepresentation of their religion. It may be a sense of, there are different motivations there. Not all of them are just out and out, beyond the pale crazies who can't be spoken to, And that's the trick, is working out where are the routes by which they will engage in dialogue over division. And can you start a dialogue with these people on any subject, and then from that build out? Now, that's no different if it's the provisional IRA, or in Bosnia for the various groups there, or any conflict. At the end of the day, it's only ever going to be solved by people sitting around a table and starting to talk. That's one thing that history has taught us. So we've got to work harder to find those bridges into those conversations, even with very unpalatable people, because inevitably peace is going to rely on that.
Yeah, okay, but I'm going to press you on this one, because everything I've read about the profile of the kind of people who are drawn to jihadism, that they normally go through a stage where they're the hedonistic stage, where they get involved in drugs and stuff, and they go clubbing, and suddenly they acquire this kind of sense of purposelessness, and they want to blame the surround. I mean, actually, tell me that. How much do you think that kind of bien-pensant, liberal kind of the sense of our culture, the sort of hatred of our culture that you read in The Guardian all the time, how much do you think of that feeds into radicalism?
There are Okay, we've got to be careful not to just be black and white about this, and let's talk about the Guardian sort of separately, but let's leave them out of this.
Okay, we can blame the BBC as well. I mean, we
but I think we've got to be really careful, though. We mustn't be glib with this. This is sort of really serious stuff, and we've got to be careful not to fall into that trap. I think Roger Scruton was really interesting on this, actually, in some of his writing, in terms of that, the second generation disaffection, the first generation, that second generation disaffection. He was talking about Algerians within France, and I think he was describing certainly stuff that can be evidenced through the psychological factors that we see, which is that reappraisal of okay, we're coming into a society, we want to be part of a society, first generation, but the second generation then turning around and saying, well, I still don't yet feel fully integrated in this society, therefore there are friction points. And then the siren's voices of people turning around saying those friction points are demonstrations that the society is against you. I don't think that's a fair representation of what's actually going on. And that can be exploited for bad. And we've got to be very careful on our communities that we don't allow that to happen. And that's therefore the majority of a country have to be the ones that reach into these communities and say, no, you don't need to feel disaffected. We're here. Let's start the conversation.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
No, it doesn't really. It kind of completely skirted round. Which is, it seems to me that one of the problems we have in Western civilization at the moment is that, call it 50% of the sort of media influencers are pumping out this image of Western civilization as being corrupt, flawed, decadent, wrong. And this gives people in Islamic communities all the stuff that, well, look, if they're saying it, if kind of white intellectuals are saying this stuff, it kind of must be true, because they wouldn't be saying it otherwise, would they?
Yeah. Well, look, there's no question, from my personal perspective, is a lot of the manufactured rage of the left media, is it helpful or unhelpful to our society as a whole? Unhelpful. Could you argue, therefore, there are connections between radicalization? I mean, I think that would be a step that you'd need to back up. Right. Personally, when I look at the manufactured rage that's going on at the moment within certain areas of the media, yes, unhelpful. And I don't think it's even liberal anymore, is it? I mean, if you look, there's censorship happening from this sort of controlling left. Well, that's not liberal. You know, there's group dynamics of using group mentality. Well, that's not liberal. There's underpinning notions of violence. Even John McDonnell threatening for, intimating of violence through as a political force. Well, that's not liberal. You know, there's a great deal of supposed liberal values which have nothing to do with liberal values that are being exploited by the left. I mean, in a very controlling way. That definitely worries me. I mean, I think it's why Trump is getting an awful lot of bad press. I mean, there's no question the migrant issue at the moment with children has not played well at all, but he's certainly not getting except
now we know that time photograph was
not true. Exactly, it's a Honduran family. Yeah, exactly. This is manufactured rage. And absolutely, and we should call it out everywhere. And that's we should call it out on the right and the left. I mean, manufactured rage is too easy. We have it's too easy to sing the devil's song at the moment, and social media enables that to happen very fast. Accountability, truthfulness, ethics, really good old-fashioned values. The more we can take pride in that, and for companies that work in the influence space, the more that they can be credited for promoting those, hopefully that becomes the new benchmark in this space.
It's good. Oh, look, I'm really glad that we're on the same team, because I want a Psy Ops specialist acting in my interests rather than against them, so that's good. Before we say goodbye to the Taliban, we're talking about the different routes where you reach them, but if somebody believes fundamentally that what goes on in this life is pretty much irrelevant, as long as you kind of pray 5 times a day and you do you follow the tenets of the Quran and the Hadith. What really matters is after, because Allah decides, and it's ultimately that counts. Somebody's been out to Syria or Iraq and done terrible, terrible things. They've crucified people, they've raped women, they've killed people. What way back is there for them? How do you say, well, actually, there's still a chance to... What do you do?
Okay, well, the 2 points there. First of all, you can intervene much earlier, before they believe that their only option is to go to the afterlife.
Right.
You can increase the value of today in the current life. And that's where things like, FATE, when we did FATE, Families Against Terrorism and Extremism, was very much enabling parents to have the conversation with their children around the dinner table. And that was incredibly effective, and enabling that to happen in the familial moment. That in itself can counteract much of the messaging that's going to these people to make them feel as though they don't have hope. So the first thing is to intervene there with credible in-community messaging that's as good and sophisticated as anything that's coming from the other side, because it is sophisticated what's coming from the other side, and making the families more enfranchised and enabled to have those conversations. Okay,
well,
number one.
Sort of teaching them that, like, your wife and your kids are wonderful things and you should appreciate them.
The way that the messaging, if you look up Not Another Brother after this online, the video that we made there was all about someone who had gone abroad, perhaps Syria was the location, and it was actually the consequences to their family of what they'd done and what they caused their family back home and their brother, and that's why it's called Not Another Brother, and it's a letter from his brother that the person who's gone abroad is now reading in this godforsaken place where he's facing the romance of going off to fight doesn't live up to the promise.
Yeah.
And so that's a much stronger bomb than people give it credit for. It isn't, and so you really can work with that and bring people back from the precipice. Now look, if people have then got to the point at which they have committed violent acts and extremely violent acts and so forth, then you're into a whole different space. Then you're into a much more one-to-one engagement space. What can you do with that person? Yes, of course you can engage with them and so forth. Well, are they going to face prosecution? Most likely. If they continue on that course of action, are they going to end up at the end of a barrel of a gun? Most likely. But if they do kind of come in from the cold and want to engage and have the commitment to step away from this life that they've chosen for themselves, we should be there as part of our offering, and holding them to account, of course, in terms of the law and so forth, but part of the offering would be to de-radicalise them and maybe enable them to talk to other people about the mistakes that they made and what the realities are actually like. They become incredibly important as amplifiers of a reality that most people aren't seeing. They're being sold the hype, but hearing from someone who's actually been there and done it and has chosen to step away can be very, very compelling. Former combatants are actually a very good mouthpiece to tell the truth.
Yes, of course. I understand that you are one of the special friends. In fact, you are the special friend. So we know there's only one special friend of this podcast. Only one person ever listens to this. As you know, one of the themes of this podcast is how do we win the culture wars? How do we save Western civilization from that side of the argument which lies, vilifies just regularly? I mean, the left plays really dirty in a way. I don't think that right, whatever you want to call it, libertarian, conservatarian, classical liberal, those of us that the broad church on the free market side of the argument, we don't play low in the same way that they do. And now I've got you. Tell me, I mean, for example, the Greens. I've spent the last 15 years of my life on bloody Groundhog Day fighting these people. And I know that all the evidence is on my side, because, like, when you reduce things down to the basic principles, you find that, the facts are on your side. But nevertheless, there's a very, very powerful green blob churning out propaganda, or name any other category. I mean, in the field of education, there's a very powerful industry trying to destroy the reforms proposed by people like Michael Gove and Toby Young, all the good work they do. So how do we win the war?
Okay, it's a very
big question. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, let's keep it in politics for a sec, just before we go to other things such as green issues. Facts at the end of the day win out. So let's take Trump and Brexit as two of the topics. Okay, so Trump, at the end of the day, you're talking about a 3.8% unemployment. You're talking about 21% tax. You're talking about lowest Hispanic unemployment in at least 20 years, possibly of all time.
Yeah.
Lowest black unemployment, perhaps, of all time. You're talking about the Iran deal, which is now turning the corner, perhaps, on that issue. You're talking about, Kim Jong-un and what's happened in Singapore. In this case, the left is absolutely kibosh because they thought the midterms were going to fall completely into their lap, and actually people will make their own decision, assess based on the evidence. So you've got to trust the audience. If you just put the facts out, and in his case, Trump has got a program that is very, very clear that everyone understands, which is America first and let's make America great again. But that principle of America first, there's no equivocation. And I'm fairly confident he's going to do much better in the midterms than people expect, and he'll go on and win the 2020. What we're not doing very well with Brexit, and perhaps the arguments, then is what could we learn from that in terms of Brexit? The clarity of the programme isn't there. The clarity of what we're trying to achieve isn't there, other than, yes, we want Brexit, but the day after Brexit isn't painted in people's minds. The motivation of what's in it for them isn't painted in their minds. There's no sense they can kind of understand from a coping and edging point of view. They're coping and they're edging every day. They're just struggling on at the moment, and now they've got another problem ahead of them. We've got to more effectively, with facts to substantiate it, communicate the possibilities and the opportunities of Brexit. And that's got to come from the top, that's got to come from May, and it's an awful lot of...
Dream on.
Hunt was right, which is a good backer at the moment. But the Dominic Greaves of this world, he didn't get his way the other day in Parliament. The fact is that that's gone through from the Lords now to the other House and then back again and so forth. They're not winning. They're not winning.
Yes.
So hold firm, I think, is really, and just base it on the facts.
I see exactly what you're saying, and as Margaret Thatcher said, the facts of life are conservative. And you look at that. You read my hero Thomas Sowell, people like that. You just realise it's just like we're on the right side. We're not the bad guys. It's not like that that sketch where are we the bad guys? But in a way, your answer to the Brexit problem is, as I understand it, we need Donald Trump in the UK. Because it's not about the message, really. It's about the people brave enough to be able to deliver the message.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The American ambassador to the UK saying, stop whining about Brexit and actually start talking about the opportunities, to paraphrase. Yeah. I'm certainly looking for, as a business owner, but also as an individual, as a conservative myself, I'm looking for the wonderful feeling and opportunity of Brexit that I'm looking forward to as a business owner. Yeah. And what I'm seeing in the press every day is, okay, there's now another, I'm not even going to say the name of it, but, we've heard the aerospace industry with their point of view overnight. We hear so many negative comments. It would be, I can't wait for Brexit. I can't wait as a business owner to be given free market opportunity to give the best service, the best products, and compete at the best price with anyone in the world. And that's a fabulous thing without all the rigging of the European Union in the way and so forth. Can't wait for that. Where is that voice in business? It's certainly not in the media at the moment. Where is that voice in politics in those terms? Taking that mandate to the people, saying this can be great, but we have to muck in together and we have to actually remember what it is to be British and now brand that and commercialise that and sell it to the world in a really constructive way.
I'm with you. I've already sensed there that what the third section of the podcast is going to be like, what we're going to talk about. But before springing that thrill on you, I wanted to ask a bit more about what it is that makes Donald Trump's messaging so godlike and fantastic. If I may invite you to do that.
He keeps it simple. I mean, he understands his target audience. He has basically worked out the real drivers of his audience, which is, and Steve Bannon was right when he said this, which is the only poll you need to care about is that 70-something% of the people don't feel as though America's great anymore. And that was his advice to Trump right at the beginning. Forget all the other polls. That is the one to speak to, which is if you can make people feel emboldened and proud and feel as though therefore they're passing something on to the next generation that they can get behind and so forth, that in itself is a brilliant piece of messaging. That's actually something I've used before in an election campaign with a campaign called It's Working, where there was this sort of change message being brought by the opposition. I was advising a prime minister just saying, look, go with the message, it's working, and just talk to the things that are working, and let's drown them with cream. Let's just speak to the positive and build people around that rather than all this nonsense negative. That's what Trump understood. Now, you're still going to have the negative voices, but there comes a point at which is, do you want to be the kind of person that supports and backs betterment, prosperity, opportunity, or do you want to be on the sidelines just whinging about everything? And what he's managed to do perhaps is crystallize, or in the process of doing, is crystallizing that positive center space which says you may not like me as an individual, but what I stand for is, and I can back it up with the facts, which is as we go through female employment, black employment, Hispanic employment, taxation and so forth, I can stand by the betterment that is being felt in all areas of our society.
Yes.
That is is that marketing genius? No, it's just a very clear, simple, effective messaging strategy that comes back to one single principle, which is America first.
Yeah.
And that's very, very difficult to achieve. I mean, we're all throwing stones, everyone's throwing stones at Trump, but they should have a go at trying to do that with a messaging campaign. If most commercial companies manage to get the simplicity of his messaging across so many different areas and so many different topics, they'd be up for every award going.
Isn't it more of a challenge? I mean, there's that music industry phrase, you can't polish a turd. Isn't, in a way, it much easier for conservatives? For you to be a kind of conservative, sympathetic messaging guy, your job's so much easier because you can say, look at the facts. Whereas if you're on the left, I mean, if you were advising Hillary, for example, what would you have said?
Retire.
Right.
Don't stand here. Look, first of all, you've got an assumption in there. It's easy at the moment. In any way, labelling yourself a conservative is not easy at the moment. It feels as though it's the pariah label.
It always has been, I think.
It's terribly sad, really, actually, because it's really sad to see, because it's actually the notion of conservative being to conserve the things that we value, and so forth is I would say at the moment, going through Brexit, is a really important thing. That's not about building borders and rejecting people from coming in and all the ways in which it's represented. It's actually about branding Britain for what it's really good at and saying, come and be a part of that and enjoy it for what we have here, and it's really good, and come be a part of it, that's fine, and we're globally engaged and so forth, but let's just be clear, that's what we're really good at, and that's what we want to move forward with, so being conservative at the moment is a heck of a difficult thing, not least because of the way in which perhaps it's being represented from the top. I mean, it's not exactly an attractive proposition at the moment from the top.
No, it's not.
We're living through a few years where the brand is all over the place. Despite that, we carry on. In terms of Hillary, what would you say to Hillary? In all seriousness, someone should have told her much earlier on the toxicity of her brand. She clearly, or her advisors, weren't listening to the reality.
Yes. Or you should have said maybe a spell behind bars would do you good, Hillary. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Sven Hughes. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Why did we see some of the Republican kissing of Mark Zuckerberg that was taking place?
I called it kissing the ring because I felt like every single person practically had to kiss the ring of this guy, who wants to do nothing except get all those people out of office. So, bizarre behavior from the Republicans.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Sven Hughes of Verbalisation. Now, I said I'd worked out where the next bit was going to go, and I suppose it's that question of, you said that the facts are what you need to win, and I agree with you up to a point, but at the same time, we're not winning bigly at the moment. I mean, in America, they're winning bigly, I think, under Trump, but because they've got the Donald. We haven't got the Donald. We've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, but at the moment he's on the fringes. I mean, I think he could be our Trump if he were given half the chance. But we've got this fundamental problem, which is that our media culture really swings towards the liberal left. I mean, even if you allow for the Sun and the Mail, you've got the BBC dominant narrative, you've got the Guardianistas, and although they're not representative of where people are at large, which is why we had Brexit, the fact is that they are controlling the narrative. So how do you bypass those in a world where you've got Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you name them, all censoring conservative voices? How do we get past this?
I think we've got to be really careful, though, we don't become just whinging in our view of this, sort of saying, oh, it's the media's fault because they're not covering us. The bottom line is, at the moment, conservatism hasn't made its central brand attractive enough. It hasn't communicated the benefits of free market economics. It hasn't communicated that there can be such a thing as responsible capitalism. It hasn't communicated the reason why people should be proud to associate it with a philosophy. You know, the liberal left does not have, the liberals and then the controlling left does not really have fundamentally a philosophy that actually stands up to the light of day, I would argue, in the way in which conservatism does. Conservatives, modern conservatives at the moment, as represented perhaps by Number 10 at the moment, but is not putting its best foot forward and arguing its own case in an attractive way.
Yeah.
And that's our responsibility. That's not the media's responsibility there to give us fair coverage. You get fair coverage by making your proposition so attractive people want to talk about it and have such talk value in the pubs and clubs of this country that they believe in it and want it in their lives.
Yeah.
Now that's exactly what happened with Brexit with the beer mats. When Matthew Elliott did a piece of genius, I think it was Matthew's idea, who was organising the one aspect of the Brexit campaign, which was the beer mats in the Brexit campaign in Wetherspoon pubs, which is, look, that's where the real people are,
yes,
who are going to vote, yeah, okay, and they're going to sit and have a conversation in groups of 5 or 6 people. So the most cost-effective way to start a conversation amongst them is to brand the beer mats. Don't do television, don't do press,
yes,
don't do all the standard ways of talking to people. Take your proposition, make it attractive to them, make it relevant to them, and put it in their life. Now, if conservatism could do that, if it could take a little bit of that spirit, then we won't have to have all this whining, life's unfair because I'm a Tory. It's like, no, just, you know, it's just like Thatcherism to some extent. You know, Thatcher made the person who owned a garage believe that they could own 2 garages, and made the person who was working, you know, that is the responsibility of the Tories at the moment and no one else. You know, now where is that voice coming from? Okay, perhaps it's Rees-Mogg. I'm struggling for many other voices that are going to appeal beyond the Westminster bubble, though.
No. Apparently, I heard the other day, Liz Truss is surprisingly good and sound. I didn't know that. Apparently, she's. I might get it. Mind you, I've got this policy at the moment of not getting cabinet people, senior conservatives on the podcast because they're all on message.
Well, this is it, and this is, now. Where's the new Roger Scruton? Where's the new? You know, where's the new thinking about? Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Oh my God. Yeah, sorry. Of course. I feel
so offended. No. I know. I haven't got the Roger Scruton role.
But you know, there has to be a new energy put into this. That there is. The new conservative solutions to the new modern world are more effective than the cultural Marxism, the arguments that we're facing from the other side.
Look,
you know.
Ann Coulter did a Breitbart town hall on this, and she said, look, the internet is fundamentally right-wing, in as much as the facts, when they boil down to what's true and what's not true, the conservatives got the facts and the left haven't. Yeah. Therefore, the internet will win, which is why you've got Silicon Valley putting all these, demonetizing, for example. Yeah. Aren't you involved in a project to do with that? How to enable conservative sites to bypass this program? No, you're not.
No.
You should be, mate.
No.
Please, get on with it. Work out that.
But it comes back to the fresh thinking in the Conservative Party, more generally conservative thinking, can be the tonic for all the coping and edging and cynicism that's going on in our society at the moment. If you think about it, you look at sport, drugs, corruption. You look at policing. Lots of people accusing it of being, you know, corrupt and all the rest of it. You look at banks, you know, risico banking, you know, out of control banking. You look at the media, you know, people questioning the motivations of the media. If it isn't our politics that provides an attractive solution to this, well, we might as well give up on politics. If it isn't now the time, well, that's sadly what might happen, is that people just turn around and say, actually, you haven't come up with a new answer that's relevant for the modern world, so a plague on all your houses. That would be a really terrible thing if that happens.
I think you probably agree with me that actually it's about time the Conservatives started talking about less government.
Yes.
I mean, that would be a very good start.
And is it by any stretch of the imagination why Trump cut through? Because he turned around and said, I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman, I'm not interested in the swamp of vested interests and status quo. That's what Hillary represents, and that's why you shouldn't vote for her. And I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, and sure as hell in the last week or two he certainly made mistakes. You know. But people are still going with him because it's like, yes, but at least you've got a core program, a core belief, which is, that notion of the art of the deal. It goes right back to his autobiography there, which is, he made it pretty clear what he was about then. He hasn't really changed at all. You kind of know what you're going to get. And I can't say that's true at the moment with the Conservative Party.
Yes.
And that's a shame.
No.
It's a great shame. We need to find that heartbeat again of why should I care? Why should I share?
You won't often hear me use a football analogy, but I have to say, I've been watching this World Cup we've been having recently, and I've been watching our team, these kids who are untried really on the world arena, and hitherto the policy of the English football manager has been choose the old farts that I know. I mean, they may be a bit creaky and old, but I know who they are, and we don't know who. I wouldn't anyway. But I mean, even my son, who's interested in football, doesn't know half these players, and they are turning out to be brilliant.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, again, I'm not sure they'd like to be associated necessarily with our politics conversation, but yes, if there is the idea of representing England in that case, or in a new, fresh, relevant way that's nothing to do with the lazy arguments that are going on, and reintroducing ourselves to the world in a different way, that's great. That's a great. But also, it's interesting. It's also doing it for Russia. There's so much commentary as well about Russia saying, actually, all that nonsense that's been spoken about Russia, a lot of it isn't true. The select committees look for the Reds under the bed here. They didn't find them. The Mueller inquiry's been, publish or be quiet.
Yes.
There isn't collusion. Or if there is, publish or be quiet. And everyone's energy stopped doing all these proxy nonsense conversations and just actually said, look, let's just concentrate on the, put up or shut up. Help be part of the new representation of our country, or shut up.
Okay, but I think a lot of this stuff is beyond our reach. We can't replace the cabinet. We can't personally topple Theresa May and replace her with the Jacob. Yeah. But what can people in our area of I don't do exactly the same thing as you, but in our area of things, we're both culture warriors. I mean, what, for example, is verbalization going to do to help shift the Overton window, whatever you do with the Overton window?
Yeah. Well, okay. Verbalisation is not a politically affiliated company.
Okay.
My personal feelings as the CEO are one thing. I've got a whole mix of people in here. So,
okay, sure.
What we do here is believe in dialogue over division. Now, if that can be to hopefully counteract the effects of radicalisation, great.
Yeah.
If it can be to stand up for really responsible, serious journalism, some of our clients, media organisations like the Times and so forth, to counteract some of the fake news that's coming from other sources, we're delighted to be associated with that. So, verbalisation.
I don't buy into fake news, but I think that's a liberal left construct largely.
No, there is a great deal. I mean, we see it as part of our work. There is a great deal of sophisticated manufactured misinformation put out by proxy organisations.
By Soros on behalf of the European Union. Yeah, sure. But what I mean is, I don't believe it's a particularly right-wing problem. I think
no. I mean, it's across the spectrum. Yeah. So in terms of verbalisation, I'm going to separate it because I've got people in the organisation who probably would have all the whole spectrum of political views. Yeah. Personally, what can I do is do this podcast. Yeah. What can I do is write articles and columns and support the people that I believe in politically and offer up my services to support them and offer anything I can in terms of strategic thinking to conservatives, modern conservatives, progressive conservatives, to try and reinstill a notion of pride and betterment through association with conservative thinking, which I believe personally is the route to building it's going to sound particularly but building a strong and stable society.
But is it? I suppose I'm torn when I do what I do between kind of the pleasure to be had from trolling the other side in a kind of an amusing way is fantastic, and I know that gives our side great pleasure. But more than trolling the enemy, I mean, should we be reaching out to them? I mean, there's presumably an element of them that are just beyond redemption.
Look, you run one of the very few podcasts in this space that has really seriously intelligent and intriguing conversations around these issues with the opinion formers from the right of centre.
Right.
And it's fantastic. And thank you so much for that, because it's a vital role that you're playing. Are you wasting energy, or is anyone wasting energy if you're just sort of trolling and creating upset on the other side? so much more necessary for the public at the moment, I would say, and for people who think this way, is to providing conservative branded solutions. You know, I said about coping and edging.
Yeah.
People are in this coping and edging space, especially in this country at the moment, where I'm coping, I need to put food on the table, the money is sort of running out, I'm being told. We've got you know, Brexit down the line, I don't know what to think of that. Anyone that's just kind of creating more animosity, creating more issues, making my life harder, I'm not really going to want to invite into my life. If all of us as conservatives can think of the ways that conservatism can deliver solutions in the modern world right now, and that doesn't have to come from our politicians, that can come from people who are just interested in the politics of conservatism.
Yeah.
That is so much more going to cut through at the moment and be so much more relevant and grow you know, group aspiration. The consequence of that is the left, liberal left, whatever, controlling left, will just be marginalised more and more and more and become, you know, selling yesterday's philosophies, really.
So basically, be more like Trump. Promote that, work out what people want, and just ram home that message.
Well, people listen to this podcast will
Make Britain great again.
Have strong views about Trump, so it's almost take away him as the man. It's like, what they have there is a programme.
Yeah.
And a clear direction and a clear intent. I mean, our manifesto last time in the last election was essentially Ed Miliband's manifesto. I mean, we've turned into a representation of the left.
It was awful.
If you say to me one word at the moment, what does conservatism stand for in one word, I'd be hard-pressed to give you that word. Where's the guiding light? Where's the single unifying principle that people can rally around and say, yes, I can bring that into my life and understand what it means, but also strategically, I can see what that means for the country. You know, now, is it global Britain? Or is it, you know, Great Britain? And diversity is part of that. The greatness of the diversity that we have in London. That should be a beacon for the world. You know,
Yeah.
We're allowing that to become the stick with which we're hit.
Yeah.
Because of Brexit, and that's just not a fair representation of either conservatives or Brexit or modern Britain.
Yeah, no, I'm with you totally. I think we're going to end on that positive note. Oh, yeah, we can. I think because it's kind of lunchtime, isn't it? You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and likeable and fascinating guest, Sven Hughes of Verbalisation. Okay, till next week. Goodbye.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement, capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.